Okay, I think we'll get rolling. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Emma Skalka. I'm the VP of Sales and Marketing here at Victor Stanley. Also co-chair of the board of TCLF together with Eric Groft. And it is Victor Stanley's pleasure to host this platform for tonight. I want to go over some housekeeping before we get started. For attending today's webinar, you will be able to get one CEU, and in order to receive it, you would have to complete the quiz. We're trying a new format, so please let us know if you have any feedback or suggestions. You will need to pass the quiz with at least 8 out of 10 to receive your CEU, and you can retake the quiz as many times as you need. Depending on your browser, when the webinar started, you should have had a quiz pop up, and if you did not do that, then you can check for a chat box, and we will post a link throughout the webinar. It is those of us here at Victor Stanley who will be receiving the quizzes and make the certificates in-house. And with an unusually high number of attendees, we do ask to please be patient with us and allow around 3 weeks before you will see the certificate. If you have any questions about the certificate, please email us at learning@victorstanley.com. This is being recorded and will be available on our website under the Learning tab on demand in a few days, as well as on TCLF's YouTube channel. As a TCLF board member, I'm of course very proud of the prize and what it represents. Very proud of what the TCLF team, the supporters, and the jury members have been able to manage to achieve. To my Victor Stanley colleagues, of course, thank you for setting everything up and taking care of everything that's invisible in the background, making it smooth for the rest of us. And with that, I would have the great pleasure to introduce a dear colleague and friend, Charles Barbell.
Thank you, Emma. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever it is. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to Victor Stanley, our partner in many endeavors, and in particular this series, which is our first virtual Oberlander Forum. So thank you, Emma and company. I also want to thank John Beardsley, who is our inaugural curator. This is our second time to the rodeo with John, following on Julie Bargman as our first laureate now almost 2 years ago. And I want to thank Elizabeth Mossop, our jury chairman, and Kongjian Yu, our laureate this year, for agreeing to participate this evening. Finally, I want to give a shout out to World Landscape Architecture as well. This is our inaugural event with them, and I know that many of you have found your way to us in the global community thanks to WLA's efforts. So with that, since we only have an hour, I'd like to turn this over to Elizabeth Mossop.
Thank you, Charles, and welcome everybody to what I hope is going to be a really interesting and insightful conversation with our Oberlander laureate, Kongjian Yu. I also want to just acknowledge the contribution of the jury in this process. As you can all imagine, it is a long and complex process, and this year we had really fascinating nominations from all over the world. And we also had an incredibly interesting and erudite jury with very, very broad global representation. So as you can imagine, it was a fascinating conversation. And it has led us to where we are here today, to explore and celebrate the work of Kongjian Yu. Now, a prize like this, even for somebody well recognized and awarded, a prize of this nature seems to be a real moment for reflection. And we have the ability, Kongjian Yu has been in practice for a number of decades at this point, and we have the opportunity really to look at this body of work and to look at this career in a bit of a different way. And so I want to begin by just asking Kongjian about some of his early influences and really what are the things that were really most formative in taking him towards landscape architecture, but also really in shaping his career-long interests in the discipline.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you for the jury. Thank you for the Cultural Landscape Foundation to give me such a great, prestigious award. So far, the most important landscape award for the practitioners. Talking about the influence, the formative experience, the formative time, or formative period. I will say first, my childhood experience living in the countryside. It was a very small village in a basin surrounded by mountains, and there's a river, a small river, a water, and actually it's a big river also. So my village is at the intersect between the small white sand creek, which is a crystal white sand creek, and the big river. So the monsoon flood is what the whole village have to adapt. It is in South China, so we can grow everything. But water is always a big issue. Flood come, but everyone get excited because we know the fish come upstream to go to our rice paddy, to go to the pond. And there were 36 weirs that slow down the water. And one particular experience I think influenced my understanding about water management, about designing the ecosystem, is that in about 10 years old, I fell into the creek. It swelled during the monsoon time. But I survived because the willows, large vegetations, the water was slowed down. So it made me understand that when green and blue mix together, flood can be friends. Flood can be tamed. Flood can be your friend. So that's about my monsoon experience. And there's a competition about villagers to cultivate a very tiny piece of land. And the land certainly, when you irrigate it, when you take care, it's so abundant, productive. All kinds of species can grow. So I think it's the water, the scale of the landscape, the way you cultivate it, the rotation. So it is within this micro, very small cosmos, making me understand that instantly. I mean, building into my body to manage the landscape. But there's a huge impact is when such a kind of paradise being destroyed. It was beginning in late 1970 and 2072. I would say 1972, when Nixon visited China, and this may be the first time my village began to use DDT. And urbanization, industrialization, chemical farming wiped out the whole paradise. Life become better, but economic-wise become better, but certainly ecologically, beauty destroyed. I think that's the most important impact. And also my mother, not educated, not even one day in the school, but she was a sewer. She was a sewer. She was the most talented sewer. So she know how to teach the young girls during the spring festival, during the without any labor. We always have 3 people come to my small cottage. My mother teaching sewing. So that gives me a sense about coloring, how to match different colors and the beauty. I think that's also have my influence. So this is my root as a childhood. I think that's important for me looking back. Then I go to college. The college was landscape architecture, landscape gardening. Actually, at that time, it's basically landscape gardening. It's a very traditional landscape gardening. We make a rockery, we make ornamentals, we create pavilions, a pseudo garden, very tiny, small gardens. Now, that was I educated about that. We have such a long history of gardening, high culture. But when I looking back, when I graduate, and when I look back, that this is just part of the profession. It's a very high-end part. We have no solution. When I graduate, we have no solution to take care of my village, to take care of the landscape, which I used to enjoy, I used to live on. I used to live in. How do you fix the river? How you fix the creek? How you clean up the river? Now that make me to search for broader profession. At that time, it was 1980s, later 1980s, early 1990s. China was still very closed. Only one import-export library in Peking Forestry University, which allow you to look into foreign publications. Now, in this small room, which was packed with all these books, which never been talked about before in Chinese in China, and that's the only one in China. By the way, it's the only one in China about because it's a Ministry of Forestry, import-export of publications. And in that room, I was able to read Design with Nature, Landscape Ecology, The Granite Garden, The Death and Life of American Cities, and the Vernacular Landscape by J.B. Jackson. And this is the first time opened my window to look into much broader contemporary concept about landscape, about urbanization, about the people, about the nature design. So that's, and also ecology. What I learned about ecology at the beginning, I learned about forestry ecology, but that's only talk about the ecological system. We talk about the energy, about the material, about the species. But the landscape ecology tell me about a spatial language, about how the spatial language can be integrated into design, related to planning and design. So that opened my windows, and Carl Stanley visited Beijing Forestry in that year, which is about 1987. So I was able to communicate with Carl Stanley and talking about the visual analysis, about the landscape planning at the regional scale. This was totally amazing. So then I applied to go to Harvard to begin my DA study. So at that time at Harvard, 1992, from 92 to 97, there's a hot topic. The hot topic is about sustainability. I remember Edward Wilson, he publishes a book about biodiversity. And he says a very famous quote. He said, cutting rainforest for economic development is something just burning Renaissance picture, Renaissance painting to cook a meal. Now, which means development and preservation is in conflict. So I ask my question, what if I badly need burning something to cook the meal, right? So now we come up the question about how you burn forest. How do you burn the forest? how do you, when you need food, you have to cut the forest, you have to destroy the natural reserve. But that's become a pattern. So that reflected me about how my childhood farming experience. Actually, we have fairly productive farm, but we still have forests, we still have water, we have still biodiversity. So it's not just about cutting the forest or grow rice. It is about design. How can you design a landscape which you can have a holistic solution, have all kind of benefit. You can have food, you can have biodiversity, you can have healthy ecology. So this lead me to select my topic called the ecological security pattern. So that's my thesis, my dissertation. So at that time I combined all this knowledge together, including the science. At that time, the very solid science is game theory. The game theory, John Nasha about the security level. When you negotiate between US and the Soviet Union, you need some point which both agree. Now that's a security point. And based on that security point, I was able to define the pattern, the ideal pattern for destroyer of nature, the building of man-made landscape. But that's only part of the story. That's only part of the story. The second part of the story is at the JSD, I was able to run into in McHugh at the same time, Peter Walker, Marshall Schwartz, Michael von Valkenburg. So I have designers, have contemporary design professional environment. But at the same time, we have this science-based ecological planning and design. At that time, this was a kind of conflict, at least at the school. You know, people talking about the design is one, you know, is about the beauty, about art. Planner ecology is about ecological plan is about the science. So I was in between, and I refreshed, I reclaimed my childhood experience about how can we create productive, healthy, diverse landscape, meanwhile can be integrated with modern design language, which is beauty, contemporary aesthetics. Now that's totally away from my traditional education about the Chinese garden. So that's my formative path.
And so that brings us to this incredibly interesting moment when you return to China and establish Turenscape, and you begin to work in this environment. I believe you began by writing to mayors across China, and I guess, and so this is when we start to see the application of, you know, you have the opportunity with these first projects to really bring these ideas together, to give these ideas about ecology and systems, to give them a form. And I can remember in the early 2000s, when I was involved with the jury for the Beijing Olympics, seeing we had a whole series of proposals for the public space of the Olympics, and 90% of them many of them were collaborations with international firms and Chinese institutes, and the vast majority of them were drawing very, very heavily from traditional Chinese garden design. And I can remember seeing your entry for that project, and it was so different, and it appeared to be so contemporary, drawing very much from rural landscapes and from Chinese cultural landscapes to create these very, these very modern places and landscapes. And so it was striking just how different, even at that point, the work was. And I can only imagine. And of course, it, in spite of what the jury said, it did not lead to this scheme being chosen, but it seemed to me to be must have been representative of a lot of what was going on in your practice at that time. And it must have been a very strange experience to be trying to push forward this incredibly different approach. I wonder if you could talk a bit about that.
Yes, Elizabeth, I think we are so fortunate. I mean, I'm so fortunate that you actually immersively being in that kind of a situation to understand that at that time and even today, okay, the conflict. So China, at that time, China just opened the door. I will say Olympic is China's symbol of glorious opening the door and being developed. So China will have such a long history, even in agriculture for many years until recently. We still think Chinese traditional architecture must be roofed, must be, like a summer palace, like Forbidden City. So these are the Chinese we define as Chinese. So then I began to ask, what about my own Chinese, right? My own village. No people talking about the vernacular, the low culture. So it's terraces, so it's pond system. Yeah, so it's indigenous way of cultivating the land, indigenous way of building the settlement. That's not in the history. I mean, not considered to be Chinese. No, that's ridiculous. To even today, the low culture and the high culture. The high culture is written by the emperors, and we always consider this to be Chinese. I had such very controversial experience for a long time, for almost 30 years. So instead of discussing about what is Chinese, what is non-Chinese, I actually go beyond that. I actually talk to the mayors. Because this about Chinese is defined by the elite scholars, this academia. So when I talk to the mayors, it's totally different now. So the first thing I do in China is actually I give lectures. I give many lectures. So far, I give 600 lectures to mayors forum, to individual cities. And there's one occasion, which is when I back to China, it's about 1999, just 2 years after I went back to China. I give a lecture to a group of mayors. And one of the mayors from Zhongshan City, Guangdong province, this is one of the most open-minded city. Dr. Sun Yat-sen comes at that village, that city, most open-minded. So the mayor approached me. He said, we are going to demolish a shipyard, an old shipyard. Can you design a park for us? And this park should be what you talked about, you know, should be modern, should be beyond the temporary, and should be really go to the global, attract global attention. So he showed me all these pictures, very, you know, the rocky shipyard buildings, and he said they are going to demolish it. And they're going to cut the tree to widen the channel, and they remove everything, and for me to design something really modern, really attracting people. So I told them, if you demolish this, you immediately, you know, not modern. You immediately not contemporary. So this is the one of the first project get built that I use contemporary language. I introduced the idea of resiliency, the sponge, you know, so I protect the tree and create an island, allow water to go through. And so ecology, vernacular landscape, vernacular culture, and modern design, the first time integrated in this small project. It's only 10 hectares. And it's totally integrated into the urban context. No boundary, no fence wall, because Chinese garden ways, we always have a fence, you know, have even the parks always fenced, selling tickets to allow people to go into the park to enjoy the park itself. So in this park, in this shipyard park, the barriers, I ignore everything. Even the road, even the path, or is straight. In Chinese gardens, the path always twiddling, you know, turn around. But certainly that's difficult to pass. I mean, the scheme was rejected by the committee, by the expert committee. There were about 100 experts in a meeting, literally in a conference, judging this project. Only one professor agreed, supported me. But the mayor supported me, you know. So I get this project approved, ignoring the tradition and create this contemporary design. And the people after built, people still attacking me about, you know, we you know, betrayal of Chinese culture because, you know, it's westernized, and it's ridiculous to have wild native grass in the party. It's ridiculous to have rustic skeletons, water tower in the park. So it's conflict, but it is a beginning. It's a beginning, and they get an award, Oberlander Society Award, Landscape Architecture Award in 2002. It's the first award that allowed me to go become internationally recognized. The first time get internationally recognized because of my design, because of this contemporary design. And gradually, people began to recognize that, no, okay, this can be contemporary Chinese. So so I trust mayor because they have the power to make a decision. They don't have the framework of so-called tradition or beauty, and they really take care about everyday problems in the city, and they take care about, you know, making something fast, quick, sustainable. So I think that's and they care about making something cheap, you know, fast and cheap. So all these driven me, all these force driven me to develop, to further develop the knowledge, develop the language. How can we build a Chinese landscape? Fast, inexpensive, solve the problem, beautiful. I think that's because the Chinese decision maker needed. Yeah.
And so we start to see sort of a number of themes in that project that continue. you know, and I imagine that, you know, clearly you learnt there were some big lessons about the process and about the sort of how to operate within this kind of political context. So, and we also see this sort of repurposing of these industrial lands, and that seems like is a very strong theme. You know, when we look at some of your best known projects like the Red Ribbon Park, or even quite recently Benjikiti in Bangkok, you know, we are still seeing this adaptive reuse and this kind of this very interesting interaction between what the site brings you naturally and culturally, and then how to turn that into something new. So, you know, that some of these things, you know, we see them as a thread all the way through many of your projects.
Yes. So I think at the beginning, I was not educated as a designer, actually. Even even at JSD, I didn't do design studio. So I was educated more like a science. My first article, my first paper was actually about the flower movement, the physiology of flower movement. So I'm a science. So I think after this couple projects, at that time, China was a vacuum. You know, being graduated from Harvard, people trust me that I can do things. So this gives me the opportunity. Okay, that's give me opportunity. But my farming experience, my sense of scale, sense of beauty, sense of scale, make me able to integrate the contemporary design language, which I run into the contemporary landscape architect, as I mentioned, at the JSD, and firstly reading the contemporary books, design books, and also come up my farming technique. Now that I think is so important. Cut and fill, irrigation, fertilizing, harvesting, and access to this landscape. The scale, which I find in my students, even my people here at Twinscape, is always not sufficient. So farming, and then I first developed this modular system, like terraces, pond and diking, islanding, and so water-centered cultivating of the landscape, the scale of the landscape, and the access, the framework of farming your framing. You know, if you people guys talking about what's the beauty, to me, how can you make it ecologically messiness into beautiful? So the key here is framing, like the farming, the rice paddy, farming the crops. You actually frame this messiness, create a very ordered pastoral or rice paddy landscape, become beautiful. Now that's our inspirations, I think, make me be able to design in this kind of language. And those are fast, inexpensive.
And it also sort of, you know, and it speaks to, I guess, perhaps related to your farming background, the confidence in terms of the construction and not being afraid to really manipulate and change the landscape through building processes, through natural processes, through, you know, through the harvesting of plants and those kinds of things. So we really begin to see the process and the aesthetic outcomes as being inextricably connected together.
Yes, exactly. I'm confident because I now if you manage water well, you can have the large landscape almost anywhere, from desert, Saudi, Dubai, or to the tropical rainforest. So controlling or managing water, irrigation, fertilizing, that's the key for farming, and that's the key for a beautiful landscape. So, but that doesn't mean it's contemporary. So, but that means you still need art. I think that's why it come up this red ribbon. Red ribbon is my experiment to test how can you transform a messy, natural, messy landscape into an ordered, designed landscape. So beauty is there. Beauty is, but it's buried. It's within. It's been buried in the messiness. But the ribbon actually highlighting or frames this messy landscape. So I want to make a reference to John Nashua. John Nashua, a professor,
Yes.
he's talking about the order, the messiness, and also Einstein, the beauty of sustainability, the beauty of ecology, and that's why I call it the deep form. The deep form. John Lyle, and as an ecologist, he described about designing ecosystem, design human ecosystem. John Lyle, he talked about the deep form, and Einstein talked about deep infrastructure. I mean deep structure, which means how can you combine ecology and beauty? That I think is the key for key for my project. To understand my project.
And so you're talking quite a lot, in all of these projects. Some of them are riverfronts, some of them use water in different ways. We now see, again, one of these really powerful themes that is really building up through this body of work. And you have also been writing and speaking for a long time about these bigger ideas around sponge cities and healing cities. And this also goes to your, the more activist side of your work and this political influence as you begin to really formulate these bigger ideas. And I'm assuming it's also in reaction or in frustration, to what you see happening around you.
Yes. As I said, in 1980s or from 1980s to 2000, China has experienced such a fast urbanization process. So it's a profession of landscape architecture, or you always say landscape gardening as in China, as a profession is not prepared, has not been prepared to deal with such a scale landscaping, such a huge scale landscaping. So planning become dominant in China at that time. But it's a planning, basically physical planning. It's actually more about urban design, put into buildings, lay out the grid system, put it into the infrastructure, the gray infrastructure, the drainage system, the pump systems, and the sewage system, and so on. So landscape at that time virtually had no place. And we're not prepared. When I come back, we are virtually not prepared to deal with such kind of scale urbanization scale. So how can you from garden all the way to build the city? That's what we needed to turn the profession into contemporary landscape architecture. and all these ecological problems and floods, drought. So when we urbanized, when China urbanized, which is 1% every year during that time of period, virtually one Australian nation moved into city every year from rural to urban. So we virtually have no idea how to build a city. So we copied. The planning method is basically from Russia, from US, from European, early developed European model. So all this infrastructure we dump in on this land, and suddenly city get flooded, city get polluted, because the natural resilience all been destroyed. Water polluted, 75% of water polluted, surface water. 65% of city get flooded every year because we don't have infrastructure to adapt the monsoon climate. When the infrastructure developed in European countries, in Netherlands or London or Paris, those climate is quite mild. When we copy this infrastructure to build for Chinese urbanization, certainly totally fail. Most of the city fail. So that's why make me think that why my village didn't fail. My village has an infrastructure, but it totally depends on nature. The resilient monsoon adaptive infrastructure. The pond system, the waterway, the pond, we have 7 ponds in my village, which regulate stormwater. And it's a white sand creek, no concrete, not channelized. It's resilient. So then I began to criticize this great infrastructure, the urbanization, which I developed this theory, which in the planning field called the negative approach or reverse approach, which certainly caused another controversial from the academia in the planning. It's a planning group. So I have the garden group and the planning group, all controversial. But that's why make me think that landscape can be infrastructure. Landscape must be infrastructure to solve the problem, right? Remember, 2 months ago, I was in New York. When precipitation get 4 inches, New York get flooded. Because of climate change, New York suffering monsoon-like flood now. So, and the European countries also suffering monsoon-like flood now, which means we need a new kind of infrastructure. Now that is landscape is alternative, which is nature-based infrastructure. So, but this kind of infrastructure, you must go beyond any individual department, any individual discipline, planners, architecture, landscape, and even environmental department. But the mayors can do that. Now that's why make me think that we have to think like a mayor, or I even more, I think like a king. I mean, it's a national scale. It's a national scale.
How did you take this from the area of controversy to national policy?
Because I think all these are wrong. All these were wrong. The hydrological engineers try to channelize the river in order to solve the problem of flood at the regional scale, at the national scale. Based on my experience, based on my farming experience, and based on my science knowledge, this was wrong. And urban civil engineers try to build a great infrastructure. And based on my science and my knowledge and my experience, I think it's wrong. So that's why but I have no one to talk to, that's academia, they have all this knowledge, being educated at the university. That's why I have to go beyond the the academia to go to the power. I think that's maybe the Chinese the administrative system. Whenever there's people arguing, you need a higher level of power to solve that problem. So that's why I wrote a letter to Prime Minister, 2006. I read the Prime Minister Wen Jiabao to say that this letter talking about we need to build ecological infrastructure. We need to build, we need to protection of the vernacular landscape. We need to protect the Grand Canal and so on. And surprisingly, just after 1 week, I get the feedback, from Ministry of Urban Construction, from the Ministry of Environmental Protection, and they commissioned me to do a national scale ecological planning. That's the first version of ecological security pattern at a national scale, which was done in 2007. And that ecological planning become legalized, we call it ecological red line, to define where is unbuildable, where should we protect first. We need to protect where it's flooded, where should be, we should need to protect where historically been flooded or vulnerable to flood. We should protect where we have valid strategic biodiversity area, and also culturally very sensitive. I mean, culturally means vernacular culture, local culture, fairly sensitive area. And we must protect most strategic recreational corridors, like Grand Canal, like river waterways, and so on. So this, I think, is that you have to go to politically higher rank in order to realize, to prove that you are right, to make your idea realized. I think that's the force that driven me to become a advocate, social advocate or political design. That's why I call it political design.
So I'm conscious of the fact that we are almost out of time. So I'm curious though, are we going to come to some final comments from two of our jury members? But just to finish, that seems to me like a very clear message to our discipline. I'm curious as to whether is that your message to landscape architects? Are there other things that you would say to landscape architects in terms of where we are now?
Well, I think my practice skill is a combination between tradition and modern. But the tradition means indigenous, adaptive culture to the local climate, particularly local monsoon climate. And my other part of knowledge, I think, is contemporary science and contemporary design. That is a combination. But for a landscape architect, in order to make your design realized, in my country, the administration system, which is top down, you really need to go to the top to use the power to make it happen. Well, in different cultures, maybe in other societies, you have more democratic system or more different system. Maybe we need to go to media. Maybe we need to educate the mass, the large population. But certainly I think decision maker policy, which means all policies from decision maker, from the top leadership. In other countries, the policy from people, voters, from grassroots. So, but as a policy, we have to change. We have to change the policy, then change the landscape. I think that's the message I think we need to, I wanted to share with you.
That's fantastic. And I'm getting reaction from our audience who are quite rightly suggesting that we should all think more like kings.
But I have another sentence called act like a peasant, like farmers.
I cannot thank you enough for your time today. That has been fascinating. And now I'm going to turn to a couple of our jury members, beginning with Consuelo Bravo, joining us from Chile. Over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Kongjian. I'm so glad and so excited to listen to you and Elizabeth, of course, and know a little bit more from you about your experience. I just wanted to make a couple of comments that really intrigue and fascinate and excite me about your practice. And the first is your emphasis on developing landscapes that are inexpensive. I think one of the things we were talking as juries, was how different practices are in Europe, probably Australia and the United States, like the Eastern world, as a different way to work, that I imagine, and I've heard your trajectory in China, and what it is here in Latin America, and probably most similar in Africa, the whole thing, working with policymakers and mayors and people, you just really look everywhere. How can you really make things happen? Because resources are also very scarce. So I'm really intrigued, and I wanted to thank you, and I'm excited to see how sponge cities concept might be adapted in different climate and landscapes, such as the ones we have here in Latin America. Also, I'm really glad listening to you, and in a way understanding that this different administrative and political scenario that you had really was central to making policy and things happen. I just wanted to ask one last question, maybe a personal question, is since you were talking very much about you being a social, ecological and social transformational landscape designer, can you maybe share with us some experience that you might have had with a particular project or people, a community that really made you, was like an aha moment in relation to your landscape development?
Yes, the decision makers, as I just mentioned, this is larger scale national planning is, you have to connect. I really have the power, get the power from the central government. Any individual design project, actually, I get support from the decision maker of the city. And also, Shipyard Park was the first project in my knowledge in China have community engagement. Not just a committee, not just an expert committee, because the decision maker cannot make a decision based on the judgment from the committee. So he actually launched this public involvement. So that was an exhibition I didn't mention, and let the public to make a voice. And surprisingly, more than 80% of the public love my design, love my original design. No, that's amazing. Yeah. So that's why I said landscape culture. You have a high culture, you have low culture. What I mean low culture is landscape for everyone. We bring our knowledge when we educate in university, academia, we have been framed by this so-called, landscape culture. It can be a mirage. It is only one category of knowledge. I think people, everyday people, users, they have different ideas. Now, Shipyard Park, I approve that, it's been proven that actually normal people, they don't know what is tradition. I mean, being described by, being coded by the academia, they just enjoy the everyday landscape. No, I think that's why it makes this project get approved.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Consuelo. And now I'm going to hand over to Leonard Ng, who is joining us from Singapore for some closing remarks. I hope.
Sorry. Thank you for the introduction. First, I'd like to thank the organizers for organizing this wonderful award. I think it means a lot for the profession. So I was fortunate to be given the opportunity to be part of this journey. We had long sessions of deliberation, energetic discussion, right, about all aspects of how we visualize a landscape profession and the influence we have on the environment. Many of the discussions were extremely thought-provoking for myself, and about who should be the recipient for this prestigious award. There was a long list of deserving candidates, many of whom had long track records of impressive body of work. Some were great communicators and teachers. A few were breaking barriers with the innovative design and research. We had a range that spanned the entire profession. They were all worthy of a recognition for helping to advance the landscape architectural profession. And I think we should all be hopeful that we have such great practitioners. We are living through a period of unprecedented environmental changes. We have witnessed the increasing frequency of natural disasters, the rise of the megacities, changing temperatures, thermal comfort, and sea levels. But we as landscape architects, I feel, are well placed to take a leading role in addressing these problems. Amongst the many within our profession who is playing an active role in offering solutions, Kongjian has stood up with his visible effort at making a significant impact on helping us to live in harmony with our environment. Offering solutions that's innovative and impactful. I feel he's a bridge between cultures, and it is a deserving representative for the future of our profession. And I'd like to say, on behalf of the jury, I'd like to send my big congratulations to Kongjian on this award. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leonard. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating in this webinar today. There will be more fabulous events associated with the Oberlander Prize coming this year, so stay tuned to the Cultural Landscape Foundation's website for that. I'd like to thank everybody responsible for organizing this. For those of you that are interested, the Tourandscape website has very expansive information about sponge cities and about its development. And also for those of you that are interested in the political dimensions of Kongjian's work and his trajectory in that space, I would suggest that you read this book, which contains his letters and a fascinating interview with Ai Weiwei, and certainly gave me so much insight into just the scale of impact that his work has had in China, and also clearly for all of us across the world. So thank you again so much for participating today, and thank you so much, Kongjian.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you for the jury again for such a great honor.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.